certain Republicans on Capitol Hill are, to put it mildly, at odds with President Trump over his threat to impose new tariffs on Mexico. The president is levying that threat because he says he wants Mexico to do more to stop illegal immigration. Specifics are hard to come by, but in essence, the administration is saying there are too many migrants flowing from Central America through Mexico, and the Mexican government can do more to deal with that. I'd like to get some reaction now from Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He's in Ottawa, Illinois. Our crack staff just told me that's 80 miles southwest of the great city of Chicago. Congressman Kinzinger represents the state's 16th Congressional District. Congressman, always a pleasure to talk to you. How are you?
You bet. You too. I'm good. Thanks.
Good. So where do you come down on this? For or against the threat of tariffs with Mexico to deal with immigration? Are these issues actually linkable or not?
No, I mean, and that's the thing. I'm not for the tariffs, and I want to back up a second and say we have to recognize there's a massive problem on the southern border. I've worked that as a National Guard pilot, not as a guy that threw on a windbreaker and got his picture taken on the border, but as somebody that was actually doing the mission. That was just this year. It's a huge, massive issue. You know, we're seeing record numbers. This has to be dealt with. It has to be recognized in a bipartisan way, not as a way to bludgeon Trump, but as a legitimate national emergency. But the issue with the tariffs, so if you're going to fight a trade war, and I support what the president's doing on China, because I think it actually probably should have been done 20 years ago, but you need to fight a trade war one front at a time, because what's going to happen, frankly, is Mexico, our largest trading partner now, if we end up doing these tariffs, it's going to affect my district in a really bad way. I have a strongly agricultural district. They've been hit not just by the current tariff situation, they've been hit by massive flooding and constant rain, so the crops aren't even in right now. It's going to be a pretty bad year. To add this on top of this, I think not only gives the Chinese opportunity to do better business with Mexico, it pushes us out of the way, but it's also, I think, dangerous precedent to link tariffs with a policy disagreement and not just a trade issue.
And why is that dangerous? Because you are conflating things that ought not to be conflated, or you're using a hammer where a negotiation is the better approach?
It's a little of both. So a government has instruments of power. One of them is economic, and there's ways to do things with carrots and with sticks. The problem is now, if this situation with Mexico, and it's really bad. I mean, the president's right to address it. But if this ends up being successful, and I hope it is, if the president does it, I hope he succeeds. But the concern is now, let's say we have a disagreement with the UK, or we have a disagreement with Canada, or we don't like the fact that maybe Canada's not joining us in a fight somewhere, in a military conflict. Can you now use tariffs as a way to compel? And I think using tariffs to do something that has nothing to do with what tariffs were intended for can lead to a bad precedent down the road.
Now, Congressman, you mentioned you've been there as part of a mission. I think I know what you mean because we've had a long conversation about this. But tell my audience what you're talking about, contrasting your eyes on the problem vantage point from someone, as you said, who might just go down there, put on the windbreaker, get the photo op, and take off.
So everybody can have an opinion on this, and I don't begrudge anybody that disagrees with my opinion. We need multiple opinions in this country. But I'll tell you what I saw. I worked for a couple of weeks as a National Guard pilot. The Guard was augmenting Border Patrol. I fly an intelligence asset plane, so we basically can use our cameras to see and coordinate with the Border Patrol. The thing that stood out to me is it's not really even as much the issue of migrants coming over. The issue is cartel profiting. The cartel profits from every person that traverses their territory, which is about 80% of Mexico. They make money on drugs too. So people and drugs, the two biggest things, human trafficking and drug trafficking. And we have a cartel right now that is actually better at intelligence and counterintelligence than our own Border Patrol and military. And they're our chief enemy just south of the border. So the cartels are profiting. They're taking vulnerable people in El Salvador or Honduras, convincing them to give them their life savings to bring them on a journey where there's a third of a chance that if you're female, you're going to get sexually assaulted on that journey. And if we have a secure border and say, do it the right way, same number of people coming in, but doing it the right way, we will cut the cartel out of the mix. We'll cut their drug trafficking significantly and actually create a much better hemisphere.
So you just used the word we twice. The president is saying, no, this is Mexico's task. Is it Mexico's task to deal with the cartel? And importantly, if it is, can this Mexican government do better than previous ones that either were unable or unwilling to take up this charge?
Yeah, it's 100% Mexico's task because obviously it's their country. but we have to recognize the reality. The reality is when you go south of the border, a lot of these countries have a lot of corruption in them. They have a weak centralized government. And it takes, like what we did in Colombia in some cases, where we had special forces training forces there and implementing strong governance to finally push the FARC down. That's going to be the type of thing that probably has to happen in Mexico, is a partnership with the United States, if possible, to strengthen the Mexican government to fight the cartels on their own. But, you know, all you have to do is basically live in Mexico, or it's the same thing you see in gang areas, even in Chicago, where you have nothing to turn to. So many vulnerable people in the population turn to gangs as a way of protection.
So let's talk about that Colombia example in our last minute. There was a tremendous amount of U.S. aid to Colombia, not just special forces present, so that economic aid changed the scenario. And you're right, it had a very positive effect. And guess where the drug trade went? Farther north, into Mexico. That's part of this story. So we succeeded in one place, created a problem in another place, and part of that success in Colombia was a ton, I mean billions of dollars of aid to that government. Is that what we're talking about for Mexico?
I don't know. I don't think so, because Mexico is a pretty strong nation in terms of economy, in terms of population. I think they're more capable than Colombia was at its lowest point, but there's probably going to have to be some help. And look, this is our hemisphere. If there's any place we need to be concerned about first, it's our own hemisphere. It has an effect on our own population, even more so than the Middle East. And I think it's essential we figure out what's necessary. Economic growth in Central America and in Mexico is going to be key to fixing this problem. Cutting off aid to those Central American countries, all that does is open up an opportunity for China to come in and displace us.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Anytime, you bet.